The Medicaid representative's countenance paled as her gaze fixated on the digital display before her. "Mr. Miller," she articulated softly, her voice barely audible, "according to this record, you passed away in the year 1990. I initially assumed I had misconstrued her words. My name is Ethan James Miller, and I was demonstrably alive, seated in that confined government office, my calloused hands tightly grasping outdated insurance documentation. The incessant hum of the overhead fluorescent bulbs cast stark, elongated shadows upon the peeling paint of the surrounding walls. Numerous other individuals occupied their own spaces, patiently awaiting their turn, utterly oblivious to the impending demolition of my entire existence. "That is patently impossible," I declared, leaning forward, the flimsy plastic chair protesting with a groan under my weight. "I have consistently utilized this Social Security identification number since commencing my initial employment at the age of 18. The clerk, a woman of middle age whose kind eyes were magnified by thick spectacles, proceeded to input additional data. Her expression transitioned from bewilderment to an emotion akin to apprehension. She furtively glanced at me, then back to her screen, before extending a trembling hand towards her telephone. I had recently reached the age of 32, having been terminated from the lumber mill, with a meager $52 remaining to my name. And it appeared I was non-existent. Or, more distressingly, I existed as an individual who had been deceased for nearly 3 decades. Behind me, I sensed the spectral presence of my stepfather, Gary Dawson, the man who had unceremoniously ejected me from his home 15 years prior. His pronouncements continued to reverberate in my consciousness as if permanently etched. "You are not of my blood. You never have been and never will be." Gary Dawson had wed my mother, Carol, when I was 8 years old, a mere 2 years after the untimely demise of my biological father, Richard Miller, in a tragic trucking accident. From the outset, Gary made it unequivocally clear that I was merely an encumbrance accompanying the union. He never resorted to physical violence nor deprived me of sustenance, but each successive day served as a stark reminder of my unwanted status. His own biological offspring, Emily, received new attire, novel playthings, and lavish birthday celebrations attended by her peers. My provisions consisted of cast-off garments from thrift stores and a pervasive silence at the communal evening meal. On the morning of my 18th birthday, my personal effects were already arranged by the entryway. Gary stood sentinel, arms crossed, a look of grim satisfaction etched upon his weathered visage. "You are a man now," he had pronounced, "not my responsibility. It is time you forge your own path." My mother had remained in the kitchen alcove, utterly incapable of meeting my gaze. She uttered not a single word as I gathered my belongings and departed. Emily, who was merely 12 years of age, observed my departure from her bedroom window. I distinctly recall the imprint of her small hand against the glass, tears coursing down her cheeks. She appeared to be the sole individual who expressed any concern about my leaving. For 15 years, I had painstakingly constructed my existence from negligible beginnings. Construction sites, storage facilities, and ultimately, the lumber mill. I never sought assistance from anyone. I eschewed any form of charity. I never cast a backward glance. I convinced myself that familial ties were superfluous. Gary's validation was unnecessary. My mother's affection was not a requirement. I possessed my pride and my remuneration, and that, I believed, was sufficient. Until the mill ceased operations. Until the industrial accident for which no party accepted liability. Until the mounting medical expenses eroded my savings with alarming speed. Until I found myself within this governmental institution, compelled to set aside my self-respect to solicit aid for the first time in my adult life. The clerk concluded her telephone conversation and regarded me with an expression I had never previously encountered directed towards me. It mirrored the gaze one bestows upon victims of unfortunate accidents or scenes of criminal activity, a perplexing confluence of horror and commiseration, coupled with a palpable sense of relief that such a predicament was not befalling them. "Mr. Miller," she stated with deliberate caution, as if I were liable to flee, "I must request that you remain seated. My supervisor is en route." "What is transpiring?" I demanded, my voice escalating to a degree that attracted the attention of other individuals in the waiting area. A security officer positioned near the exit subtly adjusted his posture, his hand moving instinctively towards his communication device. "Is there an anomaly with my submitted documentation?" She slowly shook her head. "Sir, the Social Security number you've been employing was flagged by Interpol in the mid-90s. It is registered to a child who was reported deceased in a trucking accident in 1990, along with his father." The intensity of the fluorescent illumination seemed to augment, becoming more oppressive. The room appeared to subtly undulate. Or perhaps that sensation was solely confined to my own perception. "My father perished in a trucking accident." I articulated, the words emerging in a mechanical, almost detached manner. "In 1997, I was 6 years of age. I distinctly recall the funeral service. The child who met their demise was 3 years old," she responded gently. "In 1990, a man of imposing stature, clad in a navy suit, materialized beside her workstation. He intently examined the computer display, then shifted his focus to my countenance. He scrutinized me as if I were an intricate enigma requiring careful deconstruction. His professional demeanor faltered for a fleeting instant, and within that brief lapse, I perceived something far more unsettling than Gary's inherent coldness had ever evoked. Recognition. "My heavens," he murmured. He then assumed an upright posture and addressed the clerk. "Secure his file immediately. Refrain from contacting any further parties. I must initiate a highly specific telephone inquiry first." He then directed his gaze back to me, and as he spoke, his voice carried the gravitas of a monumental revelation, something that had been poised for 32 years to be uttered. "Mr. Miller, or whoever you may truly be, you must prepare yourself. Every tenet you hold regarding your life is on the precipice of profound transformation." I remained seated in that plastic chair, my remaining $52 nestled within my wallet, my calloused hands trembling, and I apprehended that the act of being cast out at 18 for not being Gary's kin was inconsequential compared to the dawning realization that I might not be anyone's kin at all, at least not in the manner I had hitherto believed. The individual who presented himself as Ethan James Miller was on the verge of discovering that his entire existence was predicated upon the silent testament of another's grave. I was never meant to find myself in this predicament. 32 years old, unemployed, occupying a seat in a Medicaid office with my last $52 folded within my wallet like a clandestine secret. The waiting area exuded the aroma of industrial sanitizers and an atmosphere thick with desperation, populated by individuals who, much like myself, had exhausted all available avenues. However, unlike them, I had spent my entire life under the conviction that my pride precluded me from seeking assistance. My hands narrated a far more eloquent story than any words could convey. Scars bore testament to construction labor, calluses from arduous work in warehouses, and fresh abrasions from the lumber mill that had ceased operations a mere 6 weeks prior, rendering me jobless. These hands had painstakingly forged my independence, day by day, paycheck by paycheck, ever since Gary Dawson had ushered me out the door on my 18th birthday. My mother, Carol, had entered into matrimony with Gary when I was 8 years of age. Prior to that juncture, it had been solely the two of us navigating the challenges of existence following the demise of my father. Richard Miller. I vividly recall the day she informed me of the trucking accident, describing how his 18-wheeler had spectacularly jackknifed it on the rain-slicked highway near Charleston in September of 1997. I was 6 years old enough to comprehend the finality of death, yet too young to grasp the profound and complete alteration it would impose upon my world. "We will be all right, my dear," Carol had whispered at the funeral, embracing me with an intensity that rendered breathing difficult. "Mommy will manage everything." 2 years subsequently, she introduced me to Gary. He held a supervisory position at the power company, commanded a respectable income, and possessed a sprawling 4-bedroom residence, complete with a swimming pool. To my mother, he must have appeared as a beacon of salvation. To me, he presented as an individual meticulously calculating the cost of assuming responsibility for another man's son. Gary had a daughter from his prior marriage. Emily was 2 years my junior, possessing a delicate beauty akin to a porcelain figurine. From the moment we relocated to Gary's abode, distinct boundaries were established. Emily enrolled in dance classes, acquired new apparel from the shopping mall, and celebrated her birthdays at the skating rink with her entire class in attendance. My provisions consisted of hand-me-down clothing from the church donation repository and subdued birthday observances marked by a simple grocery store cake. "Money does not materialize out of thin air," Gary would invariably remark when I inquired about the disparity in our material possessions. "One must prioritize family." The underlying message was undeniably clear. I was not considered family. Rather, I was an obligation tethered to my mother. My maternal grandmother, Margaret Miller, my father's mother, made earnest efforts to remain a presence in my life. She would initiate telephone calls every Sunday, dispatch birthday cards containing $20 bills concealed within their folds, and extend invitations to spend my summers at her residence in Sarasota. However, Gary consistently concocted plausible justifications to preclude my participation. "The boy needs to engage in labor, cultivate character," he would articulate to my mother. "He cannot be permitted to abscond to his grandmother's at the slightest adversity." Consequently, instead of summer excursions with Margaret, I dedicated those periods to tending lawns within the neighborhood, diligently accumulating every dollar I could. I will concede that Gary never appropriated my earnings. However, he ensured that I was acutely aware that every sustenance I consumed and every night I spent under his roof constituted an act of charity. "Your father should have secured superior life insurance," he would opine after consuming a few beverages. "A man must provide for his family, even beyond his earthly existence." My mother would invariably withdraw into herself when he uttered such pronouncements, diminishing in stature and vocal presence with each passing year. By the time I reached my high school years, she had transformed into a spectral figure within her own home, drifting silently between rooms, preparing meals without direct eye contact, existing in a state devoid of genuine vitality. Emily attempted to bridge the chasm that separated us. On occasion, she would surreptitiously provide me with cookies from a batch she and Gary had prepared together, or permit me to watch television in her room when Gary monopolized the communal living area. Nevertheless, she too was a child, navigating her own relationship with a father who equated affection with material possessions and lineal connections. The day marking my 18th birthday coincided with a Friday. Upon my return from my shift at the grocery emporium, I discovered 2 duffel bags positioned adjacent to the main entrance. Packed with my attire, my few literary possessions, and a manila envelope containing my birth certificate and social security card. "You are a man now," Gary Dawson proclaimed from his recliner, making no effort to rise. "It is time you navigated your own course through life. I am no longer accountable for you." In truth, I never truly was, if we are to be entirely forthright. I observed my mother standing in the kitchen ingress, her hands tightly twisting a dish towel. "Mom." She opened her mouth, then closed it, subsequently turning and retreating into the kitchen. That was the entirety of my farewell. Emily rushed out as I was loading my belongings into my weathered Honda Civic. "I am so profoundly sorry, Ethan. This is not right." "It is not your fault, Em," I assured her, genuinely meaning it. "You take good care of yourself, all right?" That was 15 years in the past. Since that juncture, I had undertaken every available employment opportunity, meticulously saved every cent I could, and constructed a life that, while perhaps modest, was entirely my own. No handouts, no charity, no reliance on any other individual ever again, until the lumber mill ceased its operations, until the forklift incident that severely injured my shoulder, until the medical invoices began to arrive with the relentless force of an avalanche of red ink, until I found myself in this governmental establishment, on the verge of uncovering that my entire independent existence had been meticulously constructed upon the bedrock of another individual's identity. The Medicaid office seemed to contract with each passing second. Mrs. Linda Ramirez, the clerk diligently processing my application, repeatedly shifted her gaze between her computer screen and my face, as if attempting to decipher an insurmountable enigma. The ambient sounds of the office, the percussive rhythm of keyboards, the chirping of telephones, the hushed murmur of conversations, gradually receded into a distant hum. "I simply require temporary coverage until I secure new employment," I reiterated, striving to maintain a steady vocal cadence. "The mill is slated for reopening in the spring. I have an interview scheduled." Mrs. Ramirez offered an absent nod, her fingers gliding across the keyboard. "I will require your social security number, Mr. Miller." I recited the 9 digits that had been indelibly etched into my memory since my initial job application at 18. 604783192. The numerical sequence that had defined my very existence across every governmental database, every employment record, and every tax return I had ever filed. Her fingers halted mid-keystroke. She meticulously deleted the characters she had entered and resumed typing, albeit with a slower, more deliberate rhythm. Her brow furrowed in concentration. She leaned closer to the screen, then abruptly recoiled as if it had inflicted a physical burn. "Mr. Miller, there appears to be an irregularity concerning your social security number." "What sort of irregularity?" My hands tightened their grip on the edge of her desk. "I have utilized this number for 15 years. I have never encountered an issue previously." She subtly angled her monitor away from my direct line of sight, yet I managed to catch a glimpse of crimson text, warning symbols, something decidedly atypical for a standard processing interface. "Sir, this number was flagged by Interpol in 1994. "Interpol." The utterance escaped my lips with an unintended amplification. Several individuals in the waiting area turned to observe. "That is the International Police Force, is it not? Why would they possess any interest in my social security number?" Mrs. Linda Ramirez reached for her desk phone, her fingers navigating the keypad with a noticeable tremor. "It is registered to a child who was declared deceased in 1990. A child named Ethan James Miller, who perished in a trucking accident." The floor beneath my chair seemed to suddenly tilt. "That is inconceivable. My father perished in a trucking accident." "Indeed," she conceded. "However, that incident occurred in 1997. September of 1997. I was 6 years old. I distinctly recall the funeral. I remember my mother weeping. I remember the casket. Sir, kindly remain seated. Her voice had adopted an authoritative tone, the kind typically employed when circumstances transcend conventional protocols. Mr. Marcus Cole, could you please proceed to Station 3 immediately? Yes, it is of urgent nature. It pertains to the flagged Social Security number. The security guard stationed near the egress subtly shifted his stance, his hand resting atop his radio transceiver. Other applicants were now openly observing, some reaching for their mobile devices. I could feel perspiration beating on my forehead and trickling down my back, notwithstanding the aggressively chilled air conditioning. Look, if there's an issue with my paperwork, I can return at another time. I began to rise, but Mrs. Ramirez raised her hand in a restraining gesture. Sir, I require you to remain precisely where you are. This is a matter of significant gravity. A minute later, Marcus Cole arrived. He was a tall individual, likely in his late 50s, exuding an aura of authority cultivated through decades of navigating governmental bureaucracy. His gray suit was impeccably tailored, his countenance exuding professional neutrality until his gaze fell upon the screen. At that precise moment, his composure faltered. He stared intently at the monitor, then shifted his gaze to me before returning his attention to the monitor. He retrieved reading glasses from his pocket and leaned in closer. His facial expression underwent a rapid series of transformations: bewilderment, followed by recognition, and finally, an expression bordering on profound astonishment. Dear God, he whispered, then articulated more clearly, addressing Mrs. Ramirez with renewed control. Secure his file forthwith. Do not initiate contact with any other entity. I must execute a singularly specific telephone call in advance. Mr. Cole, what precisely is transpiring? I inquired, standing despite their implicit objections. I have committed no transgression. I am merely seeking medical coverage. He scrutinized my features with an intensity that engendered a sense of unease. Mr. Miller, is this the appellation you have consistently employed? Since my inception, Ethan James Miller. My mother is Carol Miller, née Porter. My father was Richard Miller. And your father met his demise on the 15th of September, 1997, on the Charleston Highway. His truck jackknifed it during a storm. Cole meticulously documented the information, his movements precise and deliberate. And how old were you at that time? 6, nearly 7. Do you retain any recollections from prior to that age? The query caught me off guard. Naturally, birthday celebrations, Christmas mornings, engaging in play within our apartment complex, excursions to the playground. Why these specific memories or details? I pondered intently. The memories were present, yet indistinct, akin to observing through a frosted pane. I recall a yellow kitchen, my mother singing as she prepared meals, my father's laughter. Mr. Miller, Cole stated with deliberate pacing, carefully selecting each word. The Social Security number you have been utilizing was designated for a 3-year-old child who perished in 1994. That child's name was Ethan James Miller. His father was Richard Miller. They perished together in a trucking accident, but it occurred 3 years prior to your recollection, and the child was 3 years younger than you have stated. My mobile device vibrated within my pocket. An unidentified caller. Against my better judgment, I retrieved it and perused the text message that was destined to irrevocably alter the course of my existence. Remain precisely where you are. Your biological mother has been actively searching for you for 32 years. Agent Dana Blake, FBI Missing Children Division. The waiting room seemed to spin around me. Mrs. Linda Ramirez was articulating something regarding established protocols. Cole was engaged in a hushed, urgent telephone conversation. The security guard had advanced closer, and I remained standing. A 32-year-old man who had just unearthed the revelation that his entire identity was constructed upon the name of a deceased child. I rose from the plastic chair, my legs feeling somewhat unsteady, yet my voice retained a firm resolve. I possess no comprehension of the events unfolding here, but I assure you, I have committed no wrongdoing. If the utilization of this Social Security number constitutes any form of illicit activity, I was entirely unaware of such a circumstance, sir. Cole raised his hand in a placating gesture. Mr. Miller, no one is levying accusations of criminal behavior against you. Kindly resume your seat. We must endeavor to ascertain the nature of this situation. Is that even your genuine name? Mrs. Ramirez inquired softly. Ethan James Miller is the sole appellation I have ever known, I responded, sinking back into the chair. The security guard had moved nearer, but Cole gestured for him to withdraw. Describe your earliest recollection, Cole instructed, pulling a chair to sit opposite me. Not what you have been told, but what you genuinely recall. I closed my eyes, attempting to penetrate the fog of panic to achieve clarity. A yellow kitchen, sunflowers adorning the wallpaper, my mother humming, "You are my sunshine," as she prepared breakfast. However, when I endeavored to focus on specific details, they eluded my grasp. What about childhood companions prior to the age of 6? I opened my eyes. I am uncertain. We relocated frequently, my mother would say. Following my father's passing, we were unable to sustain residency in any single location for an extended period. But you stated your father died when you were 6. Why would you have relocated extensively prior to that time? The inherent inconsistency struck me with the force of an icy deluge. I cannot explain. That does not align logically. Cole leaned forward. Mr. Miller, I am about to impart information that may prove challenging to absorb. The patterns observed in your early recollections, the discrepancies, the fact that you are presently employing the identity of a deceased child, all strongly suggest a single possibility. It is conceivable that you were abducted as a young child and subsequently raised under an assumed identity. That is preposterous. The words erupted involuntarily, yet even as they left my lips, disparate pieces of a larger puzzle began to coalesce. Gary's immediate animosity towards me, the manner in which my mother consistently averted my gaze when discussing my father, the conspicuous absence of any photographic records predating the age of 7. My phone vibrated once more. Another text message from Agent Dana Blake. Federal Building, 915 East Lincoln Avenue, 5th floor. Your birth parents are en route from Tulsa. They have been actively seeking you since 1991. I presented the text message to Cole. He read it and gave a slight nod. I have just concluded a telephone conversation with the FBI. They have been diligently pursuing this case. Mr. Miller, or whoever you may authentically be, it is imperative that you accompany them. However, prior to your departure, I must pose a significant question. The woman who raised you, Carol, where is she presently located? I have no knowledge. Following Gary's expulsion of me, I severed all forms of contact. The last I heard from my half-sister, Emily. Mom and Gary divorced approximately 5 years ago. Mom relocated somewhere out west. Utah, Cole interjected, reading from his phone. The FBI has already taken her into custody. She was residing under the alias Carol Jenkins. The room seemed to lurch once more. She has been apprehended. She has been sought for kidnapping charges since 1991. Mr. Miller, the given name is not Ethan. The genuine Ethan James Miller perished alongside his father when he was 3 years old. Carol was his mother. It appears that following the loss of her son, she absconded with another child to fill the void. I recalled all the instances where my mother had held me with an intensity that felt almost excessive. The way she would gaze at me with eyes brimming with an emotion I had interpreted as love, but now recognized as potentially encompassing guilt, fear, or perhaps a conflation of both. Gary was aware. I stated suddenly, the realization striking me with physical force. That is why he harbored such animosity towards me. That is why he cast me out the very instant I attained legal adulthood. He discovered the truth somehow. Cole nodded in affirmation. According to the FBI, Gary Dawson contacted them this morning subsequent to observing news reports regarding Carol's apprehension. He indicated that she confessed the truth to him when you were 17 years of age. She implored him to defer any action until you had reached the age of legal majority. He acquiesced under the condition that you depart and never return. So, instead of disclosing the truth to me, he simply discarded me. Resentment surged within my chest, a potent and familiar sensation, allowing me to endure 15 years believing I was worthless, unwanted, not of his blood, when the actual issue was that I had been illicitly taken from someone else's lineage. The FBI agents will elucidate all pertinent details, Cole stated, rising to his feet. They possess DNA evidence, photographic documentation, and a comprehensive case file. Your actual name is Elias Wade Hayes. Your parents are Laura and Stephen Hayes, hailing from Tulsa. You were abducted from a grocery store parking lot when you were 6 months old. I stood on legs that felt disconnected, as if they belonged to another individual entirely. My actual parents are alive and well. They never ceased their search for me. My mother dedicates her life to the Hayes Family Center for Missing Children, while my father is a retired mechanic. I have a younger sibling, Aaron, born after my disappearance. Mrs. Linda Ramirez presented me with a printed photograph, sourced from a website, depicting a family at what appeared to be a philanthropic gathering. The woman in the image possessed my precise eye color, a vivid emerald green. The man's jawline and build were strikingly similar to mine. The younger man, standing between them, bore a resemblance to how I might appear in a different existence. They never relinquished hope, Mrs. Ramirez murmured. 32 years, and they never stopped believing you were alive. I gazed at the image of strangers who, it turned out, were my biological family, the very people who had been seeking me while I was raised by a woman who had abducted me to fill the void left by her deceased son. The $52 in my wallet, the Medicaid application, and even 15 years of animosity towards Gary suddenly lost all significance. All that mattered was that, somewhere in Tulsa, two individuals were boarding a flight to reunite with the son they had continuously loved, relentlessly searched for, and steadfastly believed would return home. Take me to them, I told Cole. Take me to the FBI. I need to know everything. 2 hours later, I found myself in a conference room within a federal building, the air thick with the scent of coffee and age carpeting. Agent Dana Blake, a woman in her 40s with compassionate eyes and an efficient demeanor, arranged photographs across the table as if dealing cards. Each picture unveiled another fragment of a life I had never known existed. Your name is Elias Wade Hayes, she announced, sliding the first photograph towards me. It showed a young couple holding a baby, both beaming at the camera. The woman's green eyes were an exact match to mine, down to a tiny golden fleck in the left iris. You were born on March 15th, 1991, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You were 6 months old when you were taken. I picked up the photograph with trembling hands. The infant could have been any baby, but the woman holding him was undeniably connected to me. The same nose, the same slightly crooked smile, the same inclination of her head when she was happy. September 18th, 1991, Agent Blake continued, producing a police report. Your mother, Laura Hayes, was unloading groceries in the parking lot of a Valley Fresh Market. A woman approached her, asking for directions. While Laura was distracted, someone else took you from the shopping cart. The entire incident took less than 30 seconds. Security cameras. This was 1991. The few cameras they had were of poor quality. All we managed to obtain was a grainy image of a woman carrying you to a van. We now know that woman was Carol Porter. She retrieved another document. Carol's biological son, Ethan James Miller, died with his father, Richard, in a trucking accident in 1990. But here is something you are unaware of. It wasn't in September 1997, as you recall. It occurred in March 1990, and the child was 3 years old, not 6. So, all my memories of being 6 when my father died are fabricated. Carol likely recounted the story so many times that your mind constructed false memories to align. This is more common than you might imagine in child abduction cases. Young children accept what they are told as absolute truth and build their identity around it. Agent Blake brought up an image on her tablet. It displayed a woman in her late 50s, still beautiful despite the evident weariness from decades of grief. Her eyes were red from crying, yet they held a desperate, luminous hope. This is Laura Hayes today, your mother, your real mother. She never stopped looking. Never. She operates the Hayes Family Center for Missing Children. They have assisted in locating over 230 missing children over the past 3 decades. Your father, Stephen, retired early from his mechanic shop to help manage it. Your younger brother, Aaron, was born 3 years after you disappeared. He is now 30 and works as a contractor in Broken Arrow. She swiped to another photograph, a man in his 30s who bore a striking resemblance to me, as if I had lived a different life. The same build, the same hands, but his eyes held a tranquility I had never known. They are all here, I inquired. In this building, in the next room? They flew in the moment we contacted them. Elias, there is something else you need to know. Agent Dana Blake produced one final document. Gary Dawson has been cooperating fully. He has told us everything. What did he know? When you were 17, Carol got drunk one night and confessed everything. She told Gary you were not truly Ethan, that she had taken you after her son's death because she couldn't bear the emptiness. Gary was going to report her immediately, but she pleaded with him. She asked him to allow you to finish your final year of high school, to become a legal adult before your world was shattered. So he agreed to wait, then threw me out instead. He believed he was protecting me from the truth. In his misguided way, he thought making me independent was preferable to revealing that my entire life was a fabrication while I was still a minor. That's why he always said I wasn't his blood. He knew I belonged to no one. At least, not to anyone I believed I belonged to. Agent Blake shook her head. You are mistaken. You belong to someone. You are Laura and Stephen Hayes' blood. They have been bleeding for 32 years, awaiting this very moment. She stood and walked towards the door. Are you ready? I nodded, though ready was the furthest thing from how I felt. The door opened, and time seemed to halt. Laura Hayes stood there, frozen in the doorway. She was shorter than I had anticipated, perhaps 5 feet 4 inches, but her presence utterly filled the room. Her hand covered her mouth, and tears streamed down her face. Behind her, Stephen Hayes, tall and resolute, gripped the door frame as if he might falter without its support. My boy, Laura whispered, her voice barely audible. My baby boy. She took a step forward, then another, moving with a cautiousness as if she feared I might vanish if she moved too quickly. When she reached me, her hand rose slowly, touching my face as if to confirm my reality. You have your grandfather's chin, she said. a laugh mingling with her tears. I always wondered if you would grow up to resemble him. Stephen moved forward, his movements careful and measured. Elias, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We never gave up. Not for a single day. I don't remember you, I confessed, hating the sound of my own words but needing to be truthful. I am sorry, but I don't remember any of you. You were 6 months old, Laura explained, her hand still caressing my face. We don't expect you to remember. We simply wanted you to come home. Then she drew me into an embrace, and a part of me that had been frozen for 32 years began to thaw. Stephen's arms encircled both of us. I was enveloped in something I hadn't experienced since before Gary expelled me. Perhaps ever. It wasn't merely love, it was belonging. A genuine, profound sense of belonging. Behind them, Aaron appeared in the doorway, lingering at the threshold, but observing with eyes that mirrored mine. My brother, my actual brother. We have so much to tell you, Laura whispered against my shoulder. So much time to make up for. But first, welcome home, Elias. Welcome home. 3 months later, I stood in what had once been my nursery in Tulsa. Laura, my biological mother, had preserved it exactly as it was on the day of my disappearance. The crib still held the teddy bear she had purchased for my first Christmas. The walls were adorned with the alphabet border she had meticulously painted herself during her pregnancy. In the closet hung miniature garments that had patiently awaited a baby who never returned home for 32 years. I couldn't bring myself to change it, Laura said from the doorway. Stephen wanted after 10 years, but I knew you would come back. A mother knows. The Hayes residence was a stark contrast to Gary's cold, divided household. Family photographs adorned every surface, including countless age progression images depicting how I might have appeared at ages 5, 10, 15, and 20. They had commemorated my birthday annually with a cake and an empty chair. Aaron recounted how he had grown up conversing with his missing brother, confiding his secrets to my photograph, and promising to teach me to ride a bicycle when I returned. The truth about Carol had been difficult to process. She received a 15-year sentence for kidnapping. During her confession, she completely broke down, detailing how she had lost her sanity after her son's death. She had been at that same grocery store, noticed me unattended in the cart for a fleeting moment, and made a decision that irrevocably altered multiple lives. She had used her deceased son's identity for me, relocated frequently during the initial years to evade detection, and eventually became so consumed by her own deception that she nearly forgot I was not truly Ethan. Gary received probation for failing to report the crime upon learning of it. Emily reached out after seeing news coverage of my situation. I always wondered why Dad hated you so much, she said during our meeting over coffee. Now I understand. He was terrified of the truth surfacing, scared of Mom going to prison, scared of losing everything. He chose the path of cowardice. We are now building a sibling-like relationship, although it's complicated by the knowledge that her mother stole me from mine. The Hayes family didn't just provide me with a family. They gave me a purpose. The Hayes Family Center for Missing Children, which Laura established, was her way of channeling grief into action. Now, I work there too, utilizing my story to offer hope to other families. We have successfully located 15 missing children in the past year. Each reunion brings a sense of healing to Laura and to me as well. Aaron and I work in construction together. He now owns a contracting company and immediately brought me on as a partner. 30 years is a long time to be an only child, he remarked on my first day. I got a lot of brotherly things saved up. He wasn't exaggerating. We have weekend fishing trips, restoring cars with Stephen, and family dinners where no one ever questions whose blood is whose, because we are all connected. My grandmother, Margaret Miller, who believed she was my biological grandmother all those years, still refers to me as her grandson. When she learned the truth, she drove directly to Tulsa. "I don't care what DNA says," she told the Hayes family. "I loved this boy for 27 years. That make him mine, too." The Hayes family embraced her without hesitation. Now, I have more grandmothers than I know what to do with. The $52 I had in my wallet that day at the Medicaid office is now framed on my desk at the foundation. It serves as a reminder that rock bottom can sometimes be a launching pad, the lumber mill injury that compelled me to seek assistance. The settlement money was directly allocated to the foundation. We utilized it to enhance our age progression software and hire a full-time investigator. However, the most significant revelation emerged from reviewing my case file. The grocery store where I was taken had been investigated 3 times. Each time, they were on the verge of finding Carol. One customer noticed her, but didn't deem it significant enough to report. One security guard observed the van, but failed to record the license plate. A single individual could have altered everything, but did not. Now, when I speak at Foundation events, I impart this message. If you see something, say something. Trust that instinct, that gut feeling that something is amiss. You might be the one person who brings someone home. I spent 32 years as Ethan James Miller, living as the phantom of a boy who died in 1990. I was discarded at 18 by a man who claimed I wasn't his blood, unaware that I belonged to someone else. Someone who never stopped searching, never stopped hoping, never stopped loving me. Sometimes, the most devastating moments in our lives are merely gateways to our true selves. That flawed Social Security number not only illuminated my past, but also bestowed upon me a future, a genuine family, a purpose, and a truth more valuable than any fabrication, regardless of how long I sustained it. The boy who was told he belonged to no one discovered he was someone's everything, and that someone had been waiting for 32 years to utter a single word: welcome. Every narrative of loss can transform into a story of discovery. Every lie we inhabit leaves a trail of breadcrumbs leading back to the truth. Sometimes, all it takes is a government clerk, a flag number, and the courage to follow those breadcrumbs home. I was Elias Hayes all along. I merely had to lose everything as Ethan James Miller to find myself. Was Carol wrong to steal a child to fill the hole left by her own son's death? Or was Elias's discovery in that Medicaid office the moment that finally set him free? Tell me what you think in the comments below. If this story made you think, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. We post new family dramas every week, and you won't want to miss what happens next.